She's the golden goose.
Can send to ABC.
There's a lot of blokes that are filthy.
To tell my story in the event of my untimely death. I have been snookered.
She was working both sides of the fence.
You lie down with dogs, you get up with fleas.
Is it ethical? No.
I will hold those who did this to account.
Nicola Gobbo, location undisclosed.
I have much more to say.
Find Trace the Informer and more true crime podcasts on the ABC Listen app.
I never thought I'd feel this way, the way I feel about you.
It's absolutely vital that you're there and providing this service to our community, so thank you so very much.
As soon as I wake up, every night, every day.
I love it every day, mate. I can listen to you every morning.
I know that it's you I need to take the blues away.
That's my toothbrush.
It must be love, love, love.
Triple J means my life to me.
It must be love, love, love. Nothing more, nothing less. Love is the best.
What you do for all of it is unreal.
It must be love, love, love. It must be love, love, love.
The Australia-China diplomatic crisis escalates after the visas of two leading Chinese scholars are revoked. COVID-19 cases spike in Victoria as the Premier again urges residents to follow the rules. A leading coronavirus vaccine trial hits a hurdle, causing delays to its development. And homes lost and communities evacuated as dozens of fires burn out of control on the US West Coast. Hello, welcome to ABC News. I'm Karina Carvalho. The ABC has learned senior Chinese media officials in Australia have been targeted and the visas of two leading Chinese scholars have been revoked in an unprecedented foreign interference investigation of a former New South Wales backbench staffer. The Chinese government has sensationally used state media to accuse Australian authorities of secretly raiding the homes of 4 Chinese journalists in Australia in late June after receiving questions from the ABC yesterday about the investigation. The revelations come after 2 Australian journalists were pulled out of China after a week-long diplomatic standoff. Foreign Affairs reporter Stephen Jedgetts has the details.
This is an extraordinary and twisting tale. Of course, yesterday, as you mentioned, we did learn that 2 Australian journalists, Bill Birtles and Michael Smith, had essentially been run out of China, bundled out by their organisations because of fears of arbitrary detention. Now, we woke up this morning to a new set of headlines from state media, a clear set of drops from the Chinese state across a number of outlets airing the same allegation that Australian intelligence officials or security officials had earlier in the year, back in June, raided the offices of Chinese media back here in Australia. The implication, I guess, from that being that Australia was just as bad as China and had also been engaging in intimidation. Now, it's been very difficult for most of the day to get any sort of confirmation from the Australian government about what did or did not happen. But in the last hour or so, our colleagues here in the ABC, Echo Huey and Sean Rubenstein Dunlop, have broken a story which sheds quite a lot of light on what happens. They've basically confirmed that, yes, intelligence officials did, back in June, speak to some, or interview some Chinese press members here in Australia. This, they've revealed, was all part of the investigation into the New South Wales politician Shuket Musselman's staffer, John Zhang. Now, the government is basically alleging, or the federal police are alleging, that Mr. Zhang effectively acted as a vector for Chinese state interests, was trying to impose Chinese influence within the New South Wales Parliament through his association with Shuket Musselman. And it's important to note here, Kirsten, that Mr. Zhang has not only denied this outright, but is also challenging the entire premise of the investigation in court. Now, we've also learnt today, again via our colleagues in Sydney, that not only has the government interviewed a number of Chinese journalists here in Australia, but also on top of that, through this investigation, about which we don't have a huge amount of information, they have also cancelled the visas of 2 Chinese academics working in Australia, or at the very least they've moved to actually cancel their visas. Now, again, it's important to note here what those academics have said. One of them, Cheng Hong, who's a regular on not only Chinese TV but also sometimes on Australian TV, has rejected entirely the allegations that have been put to him. He says that it's a ridiculous decision and that he doesn't accept it. Nonetheless, the federal government clearly believes otherwise, and whatever the merit of their argument, it is absolutely clear that they are now intent on going after people in Australia that they believe, rightly or wrongly, have been used to peddle foreign interference here in Australia. I don't believe, for what it's worth personally, that this was a direct tit for tat. This happened back in June. If there was going to be a direct, immediate retaliation, then you would have expected it probably before then. But there is no doubt that the timing of the allegations aired in the Chinese state media overnight was no coincidence. They clearly wanted to get this allegation out there in the wake of what's happened to Birtles and Smith. And furthermore, even if this wasn't in direct retaliation, you can be absolutely sure that resentment within China at what they say is heavy-handed tactics and unreasonable infringement on liberty by Australian politicians and agencies here in Australia, there is no doubt that that resentment has fed into the decisions of the Chinese state when it comes to their retaliation on Australia, and potentially also their decision to essentially harass both Michael Smith and Bill Birtles in China.
The number of coronavirus infections in Victoria has risen. There were 76 new COVID-19 cases in the state today, and 11 more people have died. There are still almost 200 patients in hospital. 20 of those are in intensive care. After no new cases yesterday, regional Victoria recorded 7 today. Most of them are in Colac, and authorities are worried there are still more undetected cases. The official number in Apollo Bay is 0. But the town's wastewater tells a different story. Bridget Rollison explains.
In picturesque Apollo Bay, the government believes something sinister is lurking beneath the surface. Sewage testing has found traces of coronavirus in the coastal town, despite no positive infections reported there since the pandemic began.
Someone has excreted coronavirus at some stage in the catchment of Apollo Bay.
The reports have caused residents to panic and sent business plummeting as people stayed indoors.
We went from maybe doing about 40 takeaway coffees to 6.
But after an increase in testing, residents believe it could be someone from out of town. The nearest cases have been detected 70 kilometres away in Colac.
We're all a bit shocked. But then when we sort of thought about it, we thought it could be someone that's travelled through Apollo Bay from out of town.
Wastewater is the latest weapon in the battle against the virus. It's being tested at 25 sites across the state to try to find undetected cases.
This is an approach which has been tried before and has been successful in the surveillance of polio all around the world, and has enabled Australia to maintain a polio-free status.
Regional Victoria's 14-day average is sitting at 5 cases. It needs a daily case average below 5 and 0 mystery cases for 14 days before it can open up. But the current trend means that could be fast-tracked.
They're on the cusp of those targets now. Community transmission is obviously an issue as well. You've got to make sure you haven't got any of those cases. But Regional Victoria will be able to take at least a step and maybe 2 quite soon.
Overall, the state saw infections jump up to 76 today after 2 days below 60. The Premier urged people not to be disheartened. Wednesdays tend to see a spike because of the way tests are processed.
This number's higher than it was yesterday, but the trend is with us. The numbers are falling.
Concerns have been raised about the modelling used to justify Victoria's strict measures because it doesn't take into account improvements to the contact tracing system, which was announced this week. Some epidemiologists have accused the Premier of taking a more cautious approach than necessary.
The notion that only the lowest tolerances and the lowest thresholds have been used to model out is wrong.
And the Premier is relying on the ongoing tolerance of the public to stick with the plan. Bridget Rollison, ABC News, Melbourne.
A West Australian nurse has contracted coronavirus after travelling to Melbourne to help with its COVID-19 outbreak. Renee Freeman was among a team of nurses who left Perth last month and had been working in an aged care facility in Victoria. She returned a positive test on Sunday and is showing mild symptoms. All of the nurses in the team were deemed close contacts and are now isolating in Melbourne hotels. The WA Health Minister says they will spend 2 weeks in quarantine there before returning to Perth on a specially chartered flight.
This flight will be a clean flight with crew leaving from WA, collecting the nurses and returning directly to Western Australia.
The nurses will not have to serve a second round of quarantine when they return. Late-stage trials of a leading COVID-19 vaccine have been put on hold after a volunteer developed a serious suspected side effect. So what does it mean for the worldwide race for a coronavirus vaccine? Medical reporter Sophie Scott explains.
AstraZeneca pauses its coronavirus vaccine trial.
It was news that came out of the blue. A setback for one of late-stage vaccine trials. Large safety trials of the world's most promising COVID-19 vaccine temporarily put on hold after a volunteer developed a potentially unexplained illness.
It's often something which requires hospitalisation, requires expert review to determine whether or not it might have been caused by the vaccine.
Experts say it's believed a volunteer in the trial of the Oxford University vaccine may have developed an inflammatory condition.
The information that we have so far is that it may have been a condition called transverse myelitis, which is basically an inflammatory syndrome that affects the spinal cord and is sometimes caused by viral infection.
It's not yet clear whether the volunteer was receiving the COVID-19 vaccine or a placebo. In this trial, the placebo is actually another vaccine to protect against sepsis. It's given so all participants experience the effects of a real vaccine.
It's not implausible to suggest that transverse myelitis in this case has been caused by the placebo.
While phase 1 and 2 trials are done on smaller numbers of people, phase 3 trials are vital because of their scale. By giving the vaccine or a placebo to 50,000 people in a number of countries, experts will get a really good idea how safe it is before it can be widely distributed.
These automatic pauses, because of serious adverse events, do happen as sort of a matter of course during vaccine trials.
An independent committee will now look at the data in detail before deciding when to resume the trial. Sophie Scott, ABC News.
Gold Coast beaches will reopen tomorrow, but patrols stepped up after a shark attack which killed real estate agent Nick Slater. It was the first fatal shark attack on the Gold Coast in more than 60 years.
Surfers returned to the water at first light, defying beach closure signs following the shark attack that claimed the life of 46-year-old Nick Slater.
Shocking, really sad for the local community and the family.
The Gold Coast real estate agent was surfing at Greenmount late yesterday when his leg was mauled. 4 surfers rushed to his rescue.
I peered out to see a board floating in the lineup with a body next to it. It didn't look like there was anyone attending to him at the time, so I thought I'd try and help by doing what I could.
Jade Parker was one of those who brought Mr. Slater ashore, but it was too late.
He was not conscious at that time and he was quite pale, and I think, in all honesty, I think he had actually passed away before I even got to him.
The courage to run into the surf moments after a shark attack is beyond admirable, and I think those people are worthy of nomination for Bravery Awards.
A shark tooth found lodged in the 46-year-old surfboard is being examined. Experts say it belongs to a white pointer. Patrols have been ramped up and an air and sea search resumed for the animal this morning. A large tiger shark was caught in nets off Greenmount, but is not believed to be linked to the attack.
I think most surfers know that you know, if you spend a lot of time in the water these days, it's something you're going to come across sooner or later.
This is the first fatal shark attack on the Gold Coast in 62 years. The community is in shock, but it's tempered by the sense that this tragedy is still an incredibly rare occurrence.
We can't control where the marine life are, you know, where we are, I suppose, playing in their backyard. So, you know, we all have to be cautious.
Mourners left flowers at the popular family beach for the man who loved to be in the water.
He's a really good guy, a great guy. And, yeah.